Autumn 2005. Inside Buckingham Palace, the door had barely closed before the Queen stopped walking. Camilla was standing in front of a long mirror, one hand still raised toward her hair, as if she had only been checking the balance of it. The diamonds caught the light first, then the pearls, then the shape. Anyone who had lived through the 80s would have known it in a second. The lover's knot. The tiara the public still thought of as Diana's, even though it had never truly been hers to keep. For a moment, no one in the room moved. Not the dresser by the velvet tray, not the equerry near the doorway, not Camilla. And what happened next was not what anyone in that room had expected. Before we get there, stay with me, because this was never really about jewels. It was about memory. It was about timing. And in that palace, memory had a way of entering a room before any person did. By late 2005, Camilla had been married to Charles for only a matter of months. Publicly, the marriage had happened. The photographs existed. The vows had been spoken. The formal title had been settled. But acceptance was a different thing entirely. Outside palace gates, people could be polite and still unconvinced. Inside the institution, people could be courteous and still understand the danger of one wrong image. That was the pressure hanging over everything. Every dress was read as a message. Every smile became evidence. Every jewel could start an argument before dinner had even begun. And on that evening, there was going to be a state banquet at Buckingham Palace, one of Camilla's first major tiara occasions as the Duchess of Cornwall. The room upstairs was quiet in the way palace rooms often are before large events. Soft lamps, a folded order of service on a side table, a tray untouched, the far-off sound of doors opening and shutting somewhere down the corridor. A television left on low in another room, already talking about guests, arrivals, protocol. Camilla had been shown options. One of them was the Delhi Durbar tiara, an older piece with its own history, once worn by Queen Mary and later by the Queen Mother. Solid, grand, safe in the way only old royal jewels can be. But another piece had been brought out too, because palaces keep everything, and because in those rooms an object is never only an object. It is precedent. It is implication. It is what people will say when they see the photograph the next morning. The lover's knot had gone to Diana on loan after 1981. Diana had made it famous. She had also made it look easy, which, according to those who knew the piece, it never was. Heavy, slightly punishing, beautiful in a way that asked something back. Camilla knew exactly what it was the moment it was set before her. She did not lunge for it. She did not smile. She only looked at it for a long second, then reached as if testing the seriousness of a thought she had no intention of saying out loud. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the simple, private weakness of wanting to know, just once, how much of a story an object could carry on its own. She had spent years being spoken about as if she were a shadow in somebody else's marriage, a footnote in somebody else's tragedy. And now, here was the symbol itself, resting in white silk as if history could be lifted with two careful hands. The dresser pinned it into place. Camilla looked up, not triumphant, not pleased, if anything, unsettled, because the mirror did not give her back her own reflection. It gave her back a public argument. If you remember that period, tell me in the comments what people really saw when they looked at royal women then. The person or the role. Because in that room those were two very different things. The Queen had not been expected so early. She was there to see preparations, to move through a few final details, to make sure the evening would run as it should. That was how she operated. Calmly, without wasted words. She had lived too long among ceremonies not to understand that the hour before an event was often the most revealing. People loosened then, They forgot themselves. They made mistakes in small, human ways. She entered, saw the mirror, and stopped. Camilla turned first, not fully, just enough. She did not reach to remove the tiara. That would have looked like guilt. She did not pretend it meant nothing. That would have looked foolish. So she stood still. The Queen's face by then was practiced territory. It did not give much away, but people who knew her knew how to read pauses, and this pause was longer than usual. She looked not at the tiara first, but at Camilla, then at the reflection, then back again. No raised voice, no spectacle, no performance for the staff, just a room gone very quiet. And perhaps that was what made it feel so exposing, because Diana had once stood in a different kind of silence with that same shape on her head. In the years after her wedding, when the monarchy still believed it could stage-manage emotion, the tiara became one of the images the world came to associate with her most. White satin, state banquets, the unmistakable tilt of her head. That strange combination of youth and strain she carried better than anyone should ever have had to. There were stories later that it hurt her head, that it was difficult to wear. Those details mattered, not because they made the tiara tragic, but because they made Diana human. The pictures were all composure. The reality underneath was pressure. And by the time the marriage broke apart, the public had already done what the public always does. It had fused woman and symbol together. After the divorce, the tiara went back to the Queen, back into the vault, back into royal custody. But not back into innocence. Some things are returned physically and still never come back clean. Camilla knew that too. Which is why, when the Queen finally spoke, the room leaned into the sound of it. She said very evenly, "If you wear that tonight, you will spend the whole evening inside someone else's story." No one answered. It was not the sentence people expected. Not, "Take it off." Not, "How dare you?" Not even, "That is not appropriate." It was sharper than anger because it was true. Camilla looked back at herself in the mirror then, really looked, and for the first time since the dresser had fixed the tiara in place, her expression changed. Not wounded, not defensive, just tired in a way that belonged to people who understand exactly what is being asked of them, to arrive, to endure comparison, to smile without claiming too much, to occupy a life built out of room where another woman had once been watched more fiercely than anyone else. She lifted one hand toward the frame again, but stopped before touching it. The Queen stepped closer. Not intimate, not cold either, simply certain. There is a kind of mercy that comes from restraint, and the Queen understood that better than most. She had spent decades separating private feeling from public consequence. She knew the country did not only see jewels, it saw continuity, insult, loyalty, displacement, reward. It saw ghosts where the family saw metal and stone. She did not shame Camilla. She did not need to. "Heavy things," she said after a pause, "should not be chosen lightly." Camilla almost smiled at that, but not quite. She looked down. Then she gave the smallest nod. That was the moment no one expected. Not a reprimand, a boundary. And not a personal one exactly, a constitutional one, an emotional one, a survival one. Because the Queen was not protecting Diana's property. The lover's knot was the crown's to lend. She was protecting the monarchy from a photograph it could not control, and perhaps in her own controlled way, protecting Camilla from walking into a room already defeated. The dresser moved in only when Camilla gave permission with a glance. When the pins came loose, it happened slowly. One side first, then the other. The weight left in stages. Camilla lowered her eyes as if listening to the faint sounds of metal being set back onto velvet. No scene, no embarrassment. Still, something had shifted. Everyone in the room felt it. For a second, the uncovered version of her looked more honest than the glittering one had. The Queen turned towards the tray and looked at the remaining options. Her hand hovered above one, then another, before settling on the Delhi Durbar tiara. "That one," she said. It was not sentimental. That was the point. The piece had history, but not that history. It connected Camilla to the older royal line, to Queen Mary, to the Queen Mother, to inheritance without emotional trespass. It said state, not rivalry. Continuity, not substitution. The past was still there, of course. In that family it always was. But this choice would not force the evening into a comparison no one in the palace could possibly win. If you like stories that live in the private spaces behind public photographs, subscribe now. Because sometimes the real drama is not what happened in front of the cameras. It is what was quietly prevented before anyone ever saw a flash. Downstairs, the banquet went ahead as banquets do. Cars arriving, officials announced, white tie, decorations catching light, staff gliding in practice lines. Outside, camera shutters went off in hard, bright bursts against the autumn dark. And when Camilla appeared, she wore the Delhi Durbar tiara. Most people seeing the photographs would never know another choice had been tried first. They would talk about the jewels, the gown, the symbolism, the placement beside Charles. Some would approve, some would not. Some would see the image and search it immediately for traces of Diana, because that had become the habit of an entire generation. But the loudest part of the story had already been avoided in a room upstairs by a woman who understood the power of what must not happen. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the palace had fallen into that deep, expensive silence it always seemed to return to, the corridors felt longer. Footsteps carried farther. Doors closed more softly. The staff took things away in reverse order. Gloves, glasses, flowers beginning to lean in their arrangements. Official papers stacked for the morning. Camilla passed one of the gilt mirrors without stopping. That mattered. Earlier she had searched her reflection for permission. Now she did not seem interested in what the mirror might say back. There were smaller consequences too, not written down, never announced, but felt. A clearer understanding of what could be worn and what could not. A better reading of the invisible tripwires. A sharper sense of the difference between being accepted and merely being allowed to stand in place. And somewhere in the palace, beyond the drawing rooms and the polished staircases, the lover's knot was put away again. Back into darkness, back into the careful order of things. Not because it was cursed, not because anyone believed objects contained souls, but because some pieces carry a public memory so complete that wearing them is not adornment at all. It is argument. Years earlier, Diana had made that tiara part of the visual language of the monarchy. She wore it through banquets, tours, and those highly managed seasons when the marriage still had to appear intact from a distance. The world remembered the sparkle. It remembered the photographs. It remembered the angle of her face beneath it. What it did not always remember was the cost of being turned into an image people needed more than they wanted the truth. By late 2005, that truth still lived in the building, whether anyone spoke it aloud or not. And perhaps that was what the Queen understood better than anyone in that room. Not that Camilla could never wear diamonds, not that Diana had to be preserved in glass, but that some symbols, once fused to pain, cannot be reused simply because protocol allows it. Near midnight, a light was left on in one of the upstairs dressing rooms. A maid returned briefly for a forgotten case. The velvet trays had been cleared. The flowers had already begun to lose their shape in the warmth. The mirror was empty now. Only one thing remained for a moment longer before it too was taken away, the faint impression on the cushion where the lover's knot had rested, as if even absence could leave a mark. And if this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts below. Because in royal life, the loudest choices are rarely the most important. Sometimes it is the jewel put back in the box that tells you everything.